We have just learned that the daughter-in-law of one of LSU's coaches was among 5 people killed when a small plane crashed in dense fog in Lafayette, Louisiana this morning. Carley McCord, who works as a sports reporter for our affiliate, WDSU, was traveling to Atlanta to watch the game. That's where her father-in-law, Steve Ensberger, is coaching tonight. The governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards, expressing his condolences for McCord and the other victims. The 5 who died and 4 others injured in the accident, 3 of whom were on the ground. Now, the cause of the crash is still under investigation. CNN's Natasha Chen is in Lafayette right now near the crash site. Natasha, which agencies are on the scene now, and what are officials saying about their investigation at this point?
Well, Ryan, I actually just got off the phone with NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. They are in the process of launching a team to come here, so they're not on the ground yet, but there will be some of those investigators arriving today, some arriving tomorrow, so we're not likely to get much information from them until tomorrow. Now, I want to step aside and give you a look at what we are looking at here on the scene, because it is very devastating to see that there are parts of this plane scattered throughout the field, throughout this parking lot. You can see some first responders still standing by right here, just sort of guarding the perimeter, making sure people stay away from it. But what you're looking at is a post office on your right-hand side, and in the corner, right in the back, there is a car that is upside down, completely burned out. A lot of debris on the ground. There's also a boarded up window all the way to the right on that post office. So a lot of damage here with debris from this plane scattered throughout the parking lot, as we mentioned, as well as in that field in the distance. And so, as you mentioned, one of the victims of this flight was Carley McCord, a 30-year-old sports journalist from WDSU, a station that also suffered another tragedy. They lost another one of their anchors in a different plane crash just a few months ago. Along with McCord, there were 4 others who were killed in this incident. The fire chief here says that one person from the plane did survive. That person is being treated right now for injuries. Another 3 people are hospitalized right now, being treated for serious burns considered life-threatening. And separately, another 2 people were inside that post office. They were treated for a smoke inhalation, but they are expected to be okay. So a lot of people affected here, a very heartbreaking moment, especially as you mentioned, that it seemed that they were on their way to Atlanta, at least with McCord, trying to go see this game. And of course, when this happened, it created a lot of chaos here, knocked out power for about 200 customers, including the Walmart here. We also see some of these utilities still trying to repair some cable lines, phone, TV cable lines and such. So we are waiting for more information, of course, and to see how those surviving people are doing as they're being treated in the hospital, and of course waiting for investigators to arrive, Ryan.
And of course, McCord's father-in-law actually coaching in that game as we speak. Natasha, we do know the names of the 5 people who died in the crash, and one of them is just 15 years old. What more can you tell us about that?
That's right. We don't know a whole lot about the victims at this time except for their names. We do know they range in age from 15 to 59, and the person who survived and is being treated, who is from that plane, is in their 30s. So again, from 15 to 59, definitely a heartbreaking thing to happen for these families right around the holidays, especially one so young in their teens. And again, the journalist we mentioned who passed is 30 years old, the daughter-in-law of the LSU offensive coordinator.
Okay, Natasha Chen, thank you for being there. We appreciate that update. Let's talk more about this now. We'll bring in our aviation analyst, Miles O'Brien. Miles, we're so lucky to have your expertise with this story that is just breaking. Now let's talk about the situation. The plane was a twin-engine Piper Cheyenne. 9:20 a.m. on the morning, the airport there was reporting dense fog, only 3/4 of a mile visibility. You yourself, of course, are a pilot. From your perspective, are those conditions necessarily any cause for a level of concern?
No, I've taken off in conditions actually at that level, or maybe even a little bit worse. It's just a matter of being well-trained and understanding how instrument flying operates. However, if something did in fact happen mechanically to the aircraft immediately after it took off, and that the crew was in the clouds, situational awareness becomes more of a challenge. And we should tell you, this is a single pilot. It's perfectly legal to fly this, the single pilot. But when things happen with a twin-engine aircraft, let's say an engine failed on departure, you have to do a lot of things quickly, correctly, and compounded with that would be bad weather might be a contributing factor.
So we're still trying to figure out exactly what happened, but we do know that a witness told us that the plane looked like it was trying to land in a field next to a road, but it did look a little shaky. If the pilot did have a pretty serious problem after takeoff, would that be the protocol? And what options and decisions would the pilot have to make at that point?
Well, let's assume for a moment, and this is purely hypothetical, but looking at the radar track, it did veer sharply to the left as it took off. It only gained altitude to about 300 feet, so it never really got that far into the sky, and it veered very sharply to the left. So if there was some problem with the left side engine, for example, the pilot would have had to scramble pretty quickly to get the plane's prop feathered, is the term, so that it doesn't provide aerodynamic drag. In other words, the blades are edge on to the wind as it approaches. And those things all have to happen quickly. In a bad weather situation, it can be difficult. Of course, the attempt to land in the field would be a last-ditch effort, I'm sure. In this case, when there was trouble, the first thought on the pilot's mind would be to return to the airport if possible.
So we're obviously at the front end of this investigation. The NTSB isn't even on the ground at this point. Do you expect that officials will learn enough to determine what caused this plane to crash? And what type of recording devices on a plane like this will help the investigators piece together exactly what happened?
Well, it's highly unlikely there's any recording devices on this aircraft at all. It depends on the vintage of the aircraft. In this case, it's a 1980 aircraft. And under what rules of FAA ownership, whether it was a charter or privately owned, it appears to be a privately owned aircraft. Mm-hmm. So it would be highly unlikely there'd be some recording device that would help them in this case. What they'll be looking at, of course, they'll be listening to the transcripts of the air traffic control communications between the pilot and the control tower or the approach controllers. And then they just look at the wreckage. And one of the things that is fairly straightforward is if an engine propeller, and these are turbine jet prop engines, if the engine is spinning and it impacts the ground, it looks a lot different than if it is not spinning. So things like that, as they go through the wreckage, will give them some initial clues.
All right, Miles O'Brien, we so appreciate you being here, especially on a Saturday during a holiday week, to give us some insight into this terrible tragedy in Louisiana. Thanks again for being here.
You're welcome, Ryan.
And as we mentioned at the top of our broadcast, LSU coach Steve Ensminger is coaching at tonight's game after learning of his daughter-in-law's passing in that plane crash. You can only imagine how difficult tonight is for him and his family. Joining me now from that game by phone is Brian Holland. He is the sports director for our affiliate WVLA in Louisiana. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. You were at the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. You follow this team closely. This, of course, their biggest game of the year, playing in the college football playoffs. The LSU Tigers, they're the #1 team in the country. Just give us an idea, if you can, about how this tragedy has impacted the mood of the team and how they learned of this awful news.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been tough. I mean, word started kind of matriculating through the tailgates earlier today, and obviously the word around the press box. And she's friends with so many, of course, that cover this team and down there in New Orleans, and certainly with an in-game host there for the New Orleans Saints, New Orleans Pelicans, but also covered the LSU Tigers. So, and then of course the family connection to LSU's offensive coordinator. So when they walked out on the field, I mean, just to be honest, you could see it on a lot of the staff's faces coming out onto the field. It was visible. It was plain. And this team has been affected. They did a little something different with their warm-ups. They stayed inside their locker room and went through some things a little bit longer than they usually do. Usually they're very calculated to schedule every single week. They don't deviate from that schedule at all. They did today. And you have to think that maybe this played a part in it. I don't know that for sure. I haven't confirmed that with the team. We're going to talk to the team after the game. But, I talked to several staffers there with LSU and LSU football and then around the team. And a lot of people were affected. And it's tough to obviously, go to work in the biggest game of the season, biggest game of a lot of these student athletes' lives, but you could see several of the student athletes, even during warm-ups, going up to their offensive coordinator and giving him a hug. It was, it's been a surreal day for sure.
So college football coaches try to prepare for everything. This is something you cannot prepare for, and I do want to show our viewers right now video of ESPN's coverage of the Peach Bowl, and you can see offensive coordinator Steve Ensminger. He's actually coaching during the game, and ESPN showed a graphic of the two of them together in much happier times. There he is. You can see him in the booth above the game. Can only imagine what is going through his head as he learned that his daughter-in-law, Carley McCord, was killed in this plane crash today on her way to the game. I wonder if you have heard, was there any consideration that he would not coach today?
Yeah, no, that was speculated about before the game, and you know, it is his daughter-in-law, so you know, but still, he is through and through a family man. I've heard many basically say that he came back to LSU because he felt like it was family. You know, he could have had different positions around the country at that time. He came back to coach the tight ends at that point in his career when he could have done probably much better salary-wise or position-wise. He came back because he thought, you know, Ed Orgeron and certainly the staff back here, it was family. He's a Louisiana guy, and obviously Lafayette just 45 minutes down the road from Baton Rouge. So very close, and then, you know, obviously it certainly hit home with a lot of his players knowing what he's going through. Now, he does call most of the plays, but he has basically a passing game coordinator, Joe Brady, who came over from the New Orleans Saints this past offseason, who helps him call the plays. So, you know, we've also kind of thought, hey, you know, maybe Joe calls a few more plays or is a little more involved. Like I said earlier, though, it's so tough to focus on what you have to focus on, and that's work. And unfortunately, after such an unfortunate loss, his daughter-in-law, but we did catch him coming out of the locker room, tears in his eyes. So he was emotional on the field during practice, during the warm-ups. So it has affected him. He's not usually one who likes to wear his emotions on his sleeve, but he certainly has today.
Well, Brian Holland, your insight into this was invaluable. We so appreciate you giving us some time today. Brian Holland, they're reporting from Atlanta at the Peach Bowl as LSU plays in a college football game despite the backdrop of this awful tragedy. Now we turn to Joe Biden.